What is going on, everybody? Dirty Dozen, Volume 5. Scotch. That's E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, and D4. It's the only time I'm saying it. Every trap is going to start from this position, whether it's white or black. First trap is going to be nice and easy because a lot of them are going to get tough, and I want to work in the new people and not flood them and scare them off. If E takes D, Knight will recapture the pawn on D4. Black usually puts pressure on immediately, attacking your knight with the bishop by developing to c5. Two options: boogie with it or defend it. If you boogie, most common square is b3, attacking the bishop, and they back up to b6. You don't lose tempo because both you guys move twice. To defend it, you got two pieces. You can defend it in one turn. You got c3, which is not the best move at first, and then bishop e3. You want to do bishop first. If they bring in a third attacker, queen to f6, that's when you can go ahead and push c3, and the advantage will stay for you. If they don't bring the queen and they look at that pawn on e4 and think, okay, I'll develop my knight and apply pressure, and even if they march it up, I'll recapture. Doesn't work. It's game over. That is game over because you can go ahead and capture their knight now on c6, and you're attacking their queen. The only two squares that the queen go to, back and forth, the knight is attacking. So the knight has to be killed. The queen can't escape. They got two options. They can take it with the D pawn or B pawn. If they take it with the D pawn, you want to go ahead and take your queen on D1 and exchange on D8. That comes with check, and the king must recapture. It's forced, only option. So now the black king is on D8. Once that happens, you can take your bishop that's on E3 and pick up that hanging dark square bishop on C5. You win a minor piece, you're good. If they pick up the pawn on E4 with the knight, just move your bishop back to E4. You're going to have a good game. You're going to have a great game. If they don't want to exchange queens, they could always recapture your knight with the B pawn. If that's the case, pick up the dark square bishop immediately on C5. And you notice that you just want a piece, and tilt is a real thing, and chess as well. If someone makes a mistake and blunders, their brain is not fully focused on the game. Part of it is taken away, and it's thinking about the mistake, and they're more likely to make another mistake. So without thinking, they may snap reaction, pick up the e4 pawn with the knight, attacking your bishop. And if that happens, to solidify the game, just so one blunder on your part is not going to equalize, bring your queen to e2, pinning that knight. And they have no piece to unpin. The only piece that they could potentially put in between is the queen, and the bishop is attacking that e7 square. So they got two options. They can either, back up the knight with a pawn, whether it be the F or D, and if that's the case, push up your F pawn no matter what they do, other than a check. If they check, go ahead and, push your G pawn, because they don't have the motif of knight capture pawn and that whole gig, because it's pinned. Once they move their queen again, then you capture the knight. If they don't do the check, let's say they develop a bishop or something stupid, just go ahead and pick up the bishop then. And the other move I could see happening is pawn to d6, attacking your bishop, and just mistakes come in threes. Pick up that knight with check. They're probably not going to block with the the queen. If they do, exchange, and now they lost castling rights. So they can block with the bishop. That would be mistake number 3, because now your queen can pick up the c6 pawn with check. And if they block with the bishop, you can go ahead and bring it back to e4 with check. And when they block with, regardless the bishop or the queen, if they block with the queen, you want to exchange. If they block with the bishop, you want to bring your bishop back immediately to safety. So if they bring in to block with the queen, exchange the queens, and then boogie to safety. And I guess technically they can make a 4th mistake. If they block with the queen, then you can pick up the rook in the corner as well. And like I said, it's game over from here. They can, move the king up. If that's the case, snag the rook, or they can block with the queen. And if they block with the queen, exchange. You got to exchange. Because if you don't and you try moving it, you're going to go ahead and lose a bishop. So go ahead and exchange and boogie back to e3 safety. And that's a doozer. This is a beautiful trap. It transposes from other lines. You see something very similar in the Scandinavian, which we covered already. But if you look at the computer analysis, it is 100% legit and can arise from standard moves where no one has any advantage. Comes from the line where e takes d and white plays c3, the Göring Gambit. Black can play d5 and white captures the d pawn with the e pawn. Black recaptures the new d pawn with their queen on d5. And that's when white can go ahead and capture the d pawn with their c pawn. Black can come in and pin the white knight with bishop g4. And white can unpin it with bishop e2. If black gets grisly and tries getting greedy and snagging that pawn by exchanging the bishop for the knight on f3, white will recapture with their bishop on f3. And here you can think about it. Bishop's under attack, and there's 2 attackers on the pawn and only 1 defender. You'd think you can grab that pawn. Queen captures d4, but you have the awesome resource, bishop capture c6 check, removing the defender of the queen. Regardless if the black king moves to, e7, d8, or even, I guess it could block with the queen and just give it up outright and lose to checkmate. But let's say they do the most logical thing and capture the bishop on c6. Their queen falls. Queen captures d4. Hoorah. That's it's in the Scotch Gambit, Göring Gambit, for the record. See you on the next. The next 2 traps are very similar, but we are counting them as 2 because they are different. When e takes d, we do not recapture like the other lines. We bring the bishop to c4, playing the Scotch Gambit. And if the black bishop only goes to e7, red flag goes up. You got to see if you can pull a swift one. You want to go ahead and castle from here, because you want more or less black to play the move h6, because that is a logical move. It's one of the top 5 moves. It stops white from playing knight to g5 and bishop to g5. If that magical move is played, You push c3, and if black takes it, it is game over. Checkmate in 3. You can bring the bishop to d5, threatening queen. Bring the queen to d5, and you're threatening queen f7, checkmate. They got 2 moves to slow it down. They got pawn to d6, and you go ahead and bring the queen in to f7. The king has to go to d7, and you bring the bishop to e6 for checkmate. The only other move that slows it down is knight to e5, and that's when you capture it with your knight that's on f3, and it's checkmate in 1 no matter what they do. Even if they push d6 again, it's checkmate because the knight covers it. And that's a quick one. Very similar to the last trap, but you're just not waiting like a sitting duck, hoping that they move h6. You're proactive on this one. This is my version of the trap. I don't think this exists out on the internet, but who knows? Let me know if it does. E takes d. Bishop comes to c4, Scotch Gambit. And if they come in for a check on b4, you push your c-pawn. If the d-pawn takes the c-pawn, you recapture the c-pawn with your b-pawn. And there's only 5 safe squares for them to go to at this point in time. One of them being where they started. This one's This one's the best. This one's blocking in their pawn. And this is no. This is where you can execute the trap and get about a 4-point advantage. Similarly, you bring the queen to d5, threatening f7 checkmate. And they bring their knight to h6 now. And you capture their knight with your dark squared bishop on h6. They cannot recapture. That is a free knight. If they recaptured, they would lose the game. From here, they have to castle, because that knight was protecting the f7 pawn. By castling, that also protects the f7 pawn. And then you can choose anywhere you want to move your bishop. Once it settles, it's 3.3 to 3.9, all 5 squares. Doesn't matter where you go. I will mention that technically speaking, the rook can go to f8 to guard the f7 pawn, but then that's just dumb. Common sense. And also, the knight they can give up for free if they want on e5, and you recapture with your knight on e5. Same thing, common sense. And that'll wrap it up. Very close, but no cigar. Alright, and this line, it's actually a really good one. E takes d, knight captures the d4 pawn, and pressure is mounted, so the bishop comes out to c5. White defends it with bishop e3. Queen comes to f6, and c3 pawn gets pushed. Black develops their last knight to e7, and white plays this awkward looking move, knight to d2. So if white tries winning a pawn here by capturing the knight, thinking the pawn will recapture, and then, 2 attackers on the pawn, you got this awesome move, pawn to e5. And if black makes the mistake of capturing the pawn, no good for them, because you then can go ahead and capture the knight with the pawn on d4. And now both pieces are forked. Now the bishop can capture the pawn because the white bishop is pinned, but the white knight can jump to c4, attacking the queen. And when the queen is attacked, more or less, it's got to give up. Now there's the bishop and the queen are attacking the bishop, and no move is going to save it. So I can try, pushing e6, but then the queen's going to come in and snag the bishop. And that's more or less the way the cookie crumbles. Their best move from here is pushing the d pawn, and the computer is a toss-up between a3 is slightly better than d2. It'll catch up and go over 2 if you give it enough time. But it's a risk playing this, because when you push e5, black has a couple tries. It can jump into c2, forking your king and rook, and you can capture it with your queen, and then the black queen will pick up the pawn, and then from there you can go ahead and jump the knight to c4, attacking the queen, and it's covered by the bishop. Their queen e6, and then after that, white can go ahead and castle, and black will scoop up the dark squared bishop with theirs, and you want to recapture with the knight. And black's best move from here is pushing the d pawn, either d6 or d5. But if they try getting fancy and taking the pawn, move your bishop to c4, attacking the queen. And if they come in with a check, just boogie out, and then they'll have to eject through the a5 square. And they have one more try. That'll give them like a half pawn advantage if they play perfectly. And their other good try is queen to b6, more or less. And if that's the case, just jump your knight to c4, and then they got to bring the queen out to e6. And then you can start munching up stuff. Go ahead, take the pawn. Bishop's going to back up. And you're more or less going to get the advantage here. So that's one more trap in the classical variation for you. See you on the next. In this trap, I'm re-recording it because it was 18 minutes and there was just too many variations, and I even had to open up this menu with the 5 best lines. So we're going to strictly keep it to one of them. And I'll explain what I cut out. E takes D, knight takes D, and black in this trap is looking to fianchetto their kingside bishop. So they're going to move their knight to e7 so it's not in the way. We develop our knight to c3, and they push their g pawn to g6. Once they do that, we know they're committed. We bring our bishop out, pinning their knight. All the other lines that I'm cutting out are like if the knight takes, or after, or this motherfucker, or different variations. We're only going to cover in this video what happens when they actually fianchetto the bishop. 17 minutes. I was talking fast. It should have been over a half hour. So when the bishop fianchettos on g7, we jump up the knight to d5. And also what I'm cutting out is from this position, what happens if they capture this knight, they capture this knight, they push up this, that. We're covering when the bishop takes the knight on d4, and we recapture with our queen. We're doing multiple threats here. They have several tries, and we can slow down now because we're going to cover the main 4, and that's the video. If they take the queen, They have fallen for the trap, and we move our knight to f6 with check. The king is forced to move to f8, and then we bring our bishop to h6 for checkmate. If they try, let's say they try taking our knight on d5, we go ahead and bring our queen to h8 for checkmate. If they try castling, we bring our knight to f6. If they try bringing their queen to the corner, we go ahead and jump our knight back to g4. And that's check. If they move their king back to g8, that is knight h6 checkmate. Instead of jumping back, if they try blocking with the knight, then we go ahead and take our bishop to f6 check. And then once the king moves to g8, we have knight h6 checkmate. And what else do we got? If they try marching up the bishop, the bishop's pawn, we can go ahead and capture the pawn with our bishop on f6. And if they kill our bishop, then we can recapture with our queen. And once they move their king out of the harm's way and put it back to g8, we come through with checkmate, knight h6 again. And if they just try moving the king and not taking on the bishop, then we can go ahead and just jump our knight once again to h6 for checkmate. All beautiful lines, man. All beautiful. And the only saving grace move, and the reason why it's not a direct checkmate, is playing f6. And real quick, if they try playing f5, I believe it's queen, take rook in the corner, check. If they block with the knight, that's the horrible move. That's checkmate with queen capture g8. And if they run with the king and put him on f7, then we have the beautiful move. Ooh, did not mean to do that. Queen f6 check. And then from here, they got two moves. If they go king to e8, why is my screen messed up? Fix the screen. We can put our queen on g7, freeing up that f6 square, and no matter what they do, knight to f6 is checkmate. So let's say they do something stupid like that. Boom. The only move that is not knight f6 checkmate is if they actually take the knight by their own knight. So if they capture d5 with e7, then we have queen g8 checkmate. And from move 10, if the king dips out to the g8 square, we have bishop h6. And now we're threatening to bring our queen to g7 checkmate. And there's not a single move which hauls that. And even if they bring their queen out to f8, that's the only move that changes it. We can go ahead and bring our queen to f8 for checkmate. So that was a 7-minute video, and we cut out a shit ton. On to the next. Very passive here. If black plays one of the top engine moves, d6, you go ahead and play another top engine move, c3. And if they develop another top engine move, knight f6, what you want to do here is push your d pawn to kick back the knight. And one of the top moves is putting it right back on b8. You want to play a passive move because you want to entice black to take your e4 pawn. So play something like bishop e2, and if black does take the bait, queen a4 check, no matter what they do. Queen gobbles up the knight, game over. This is very similar to a trap we already discussed. If e takes d, we're going to play the Scotch Gambit by bringing the bishop to c4. And when black brings its bishop to b4 checking you, you push c3 blocking it. And if d takes c, then you play b takes c. An awesome trap earlier we discussed was when the bishop comes to e7. Now that's a no-no for them. It's also bad if they bring the bishop to c5, because your best move from here is sacking the bishop on f7. And when they recapture, you can bring your queen now to d5, checking the king. And no matter what they do to, I got stop the check, which is basically move the king, their best try is just e8. You pick up the bishop, and now the king is vulnerable, and you should have a good game. I will mention that if the king is stupid and goes to g6, then it is checkmate by queen f5. And if they go king f6, it is also a checkmate, more or less. That is bishop g5 check, and that forces the king to g6. And then you can play queen f5 check, forcing the king over to h5. And then checkmate is pushing the pawn to g5. And that's that. This is a trap I've never seen online anywhere in all my research, but I just pulled it off in my game in 10 moves. So I simplified it and took away 2 moves. E takes d, Scotch Gambit, bishop c4, pawn d6, c3, bishop g4, queen b3, bishop captures knight on f3, bishop f7 check. It does not matter if the king goes to e7 or d7. Queen e6's checkmate. Bada bing, bada boom. There is actually a legal mate in the Scotch game. When e takes d, you play the Göring Gambit by pushing c3. And if d takes c, you go ahead and bring out the bishop to c4. And if black doesn't want to go down the hole, c takes b, and kind of like the double pawn sacrifice, or the double pawn gambit in the Göring Gambit, giving white a huge advantage, and they make a developing move trying to get their bishop out. White can go ahead and recapture the c3 pawn, And black can now come out with their bishop on g4, pinning the knight. And if white pushes the e-pawn to e5, tempting black to capture it with the knight, they have just made a huge mistake, because you can capture that knight with your pinned, quote-unquote, f3 knight. And if black wants to save some kind of ace, they can capture with the pawn, and then your queen can capture the bishop on g4. But if black takes the bait and their bishop on g4 captures the white queen, now white can go ahead and play bishop f7 check. The only legal move for black is king e7, and you can just go ahead and jump up with the knight to d5, and that is checkmate. That is a legal trap in the Scotch game. I will mention that the trap we covered earlier, it can backfire for white if they don't know what they're doing, or don't think about their moves, or even have watched other tutorials or trap videos, because a lot of them have the wrong move. And let me show you. After e takes d and white brings the bishop to c4, playing the Scotch Gambit, if the knight goes to e7, a lot of the times white will try pulling the Göring almost Gambit pawn push by playing c3. And if d takes c, they'll jump right ahead with the bishop, threatening checkmate on f7. And more or less, black is forced to play this knight move to h6. And it is a free knight with the white bishop capturing on h6. But after black castles, a lot of the times they'll look at the pawn on c3 and they'll think, oh my god, they're going to capture, that pawn, so I better bring my bishop back to c1. That's a huge mistake, because black will not, you do not capture that pawn, because you give the advantage back to them. I mean, if they were dumb enough to go ahead and take the pawn, then it is what it is. So what you're going to do instead is jump the knight to b4, attacking the queen. And now you're threatening to jump to c7, forking the king and rook. And there's no square for the king to go to protect that square. I mean, if they tried to bring their queen back here, which is the only actual square to do so, you can just go ahead and push the pawn to c2, and now you fork the 2. And, they'd have to move the queen, and after that, you get that minor piece back that they got off you, and you're going to have a good game. So the move to note is this one right here. Oh, not that one. Knight to b4. This is a trap for black, and it's in the main line. So after e takes d and knight takes d4, we got the bishop coming out, attacking the knight on c5. Main line, standard theory, knight will back up to b3, attacking the bishop, so the bishop will tuck away to b6. From here, the knight will jump to c3, developing. And black will develop their knight to f6. If white goes ahead and pins that knight with bringing in their dark squared bishop to g5, good things are about to go down. Black has to stop white from pushing the e-pawn, because then they would lose the knight to the pawn. So they are going to push d6. And I will mention, I do the research. All my traps are thoroughly researched and logical. There's no mistakes. Well,
as of I think. Prove me wrong. Put it in the comment if you ever find one. I'll lick a boot. After the D pawn marches up, I actually made this mistake in a game, and it cost me dearly. And I found this trap myself in the later analysis. I tried jumping up the knight to D5 as white. Now, the best move for black, honestly, is bishop capture F2 with check. And after the king captures the F2 pawn, or the F2 bishop, the knight can now jump and capture the E4 pawn with check. And after the king does whatever it has to do, the knight will pick up the bishop. That's more or less the trap. But that's not the trap I'm showcasing. That's the safe way. That's the safe way right here. What I discovered is if you want to roll the dice, because right here you have a negative 3.5 advantage, if you want to risk, most traps come with a risk, taking the E4 pawn, the only move for white that actually retains the lead is knight captured the bishop on B6. If they don't play that, you're golden. And I mean, come on, your queen's hanging, and if they take the queen, it's game over. This is beautiful. I think it's worth it because it's just a game. Unless you're in a tournament, don't do this. Don't use any traps in a tournament. If they take the queen, check out this motherfucker right here. Bishop F2 check. The king has one move. Has to go E2. From here, the light squared bishop goes to G4 checking. Yet again, the king has one move. D3. When I did the analysis, I won the game. I came back and won. Black took the queen with the bishop, but that's not the right move because that gives the advantage back to them. That's how I won. What you can do is finish the checkmate. Knight to E5 check. King has yet again one move. All forced. Has to take your other knight. You push F5, checking the king. Black has one move yet again. Has to go F4. Now you bring your knight back to G6, checking the king. And they have one move yet again. G5. And to finish up checkmate, bishop H4. It's just beautiful. And to prove that white only has one move every time. Right there, one move. 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 And that's that. So, yeah. It's just nice. And once they take the queen, you come through a check. It's all forced. So, I don't think it's ever been played before. It's something that I discovered. Did not find out anywhere. Let me know what you think of this trap in particular, and I'll catch you on the next.